TLC, where they don't just care for your loved one, they give them tender, loving care. For more info, you can reach them at 909-528-9759. That's 909-528-9759 for Tender Hearts TLC.
Listen to KCAA Loma Linda for less confrontation and more information.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. This week, like every week, we'll be talking about important issues affecting our community. This week, we'll be talking about mental illness and physical disability in the criminal justice system, as well as the right to counsel and the plea bargain trap. Our guest today is Dr. Michael Brady. Dr. Brady received his PhD degree in economics from the University of California. He received his BA and MA degrees from California State University, and he is also currently teaches at the faculty for California State University Dominguez Hill, and he is also the author of the book A Critical Analysis of the Public Defender's Office in Duchesne County, Utah, based on the 2007-2008 case of Mr. Christopher Uvelis. Now, one of the reasons why I felt like this is a very interesting case. Obviously, I had an opportunity myself to personally work on this case, but the reason why I feel like this is a really important or really interesting book and an interesting case is because I believe it addresses three really important issues in the criminal justice system that we're dealing with right now. One is the issue of, or the constitutional right to have proper representation, or the duty to advocate on behalf of a person accused of a crime. Number two is the issue of mental illness as well as physical disabilities and the way in which our criminal justice system deals with individuals that are affected by one or the other. And also the issue with what I call the plea bargain trap, which is a significant issue within the criminal justice system. And as I think about this case, I think about many other cases where, you know, we're having these types of problems. And one is the issue of both knowledge and resources. Those are the two things that ultimately determine the outcome of someone accused of a criminal offense. How much they know about the case themselves, and what type of resources they have at the time that they're dealing with what they've been accused of. And so before we go off into it, Dr. Brady, I kind of want you to tell me a little bit about, I guess, first of all, why did you write the book, and a little bit about the book itself.
Okay, I wrote the book after Christopher Uvelis had been pleaded guilty, and he told me that at the trial, the witnesses were not telling the truth. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, the lady stated that she was my mother and that Heather and Kyra were my sisters and that I lived at this residence. And she is not my mother. The two ladies are not my sisters, and I never lived in their house. So I said, no, Christopher, I just can't believe it. I can't believe what you're telling me. He says, Mike, I'm telling you the truth. I know that you know that I have a tendency to exaggerate. I said, so, okay. So I thought about it for a couple of months, and then I said, I'm going to get the transcripts. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the transcripts. What I had to get were audios. And when I attempted to get the audio tapes, I had a very difficult time. My first attempt, I was told that the lady was on vacation for 6 weeks. I called back 6 weeks later, and then the lady told me they would cost $550. And I said, well, I have my credit card here. Let's go. She says, well, why don't you call me back a week later? I called her back a week later, and it turns out that the audio go for $35. So now I'm really suspicious. So I pay the $35, and a week later, 4 audio tapes show up in the mailbox. Now what I need to do is find someone like I did, Cindy Barr, who's a very well-known, court-appointed and approved person who can translate transcripts. Unfortunately, she's so good that she was working on about 8 or 9 other jobs at the time, so my job came last. So I got my transcripts about 13 months after I had given her the 4 audio tapes. And sure enough, right there on page 16, 17, 18, and 19, exactly what Christopher said was the case, In other words, if you go to page 16, 17, 18, 19 of the book, which is really the transcripts, you can find the sheriff's deputy stating, Miss Bergman, your son did this, and then the prosecutor will say, now what about this on the son? The son did this. And the fact of the matter is that Mrs. Bergman is really well known in Duchesne County because she's a 7-time convicted felon. She never went to prison. She did no more than 16 days total for those 7 felonies. Anyway, in 2004, 2 of the felonies are for, she was charged for 30, she was found guilty of 2, lying on government forms to get aid. She got $50,000, she stole $50,000. And the other 2 convictions in 2004 were for witness tampering. She was trying to get the jurors, who she knew who all the jurors were, to tell or agree to let her go. So the important thing here is to realize that at that time, Duquesne County is a very, very small county, about 7,000, 8,000 people, and everyone knows everyone else. And I think the problem here is that Christopher Uveas, he didn't fit. He didn't fit the type of person they wanted to do Duchesne County.
Right. So, just to be clear before we go further, when we talk about Christopher, and I kind of want to give people a little bit of background about Christopher. I guess, first of all, just to be clear, my understanding is that Christopher suffers from a physical disabilities, which is from his arm specifically, correct?
Yeah, his arm. At City of Hope, they diagnosed him when he was 16 years old as having 6 problems. So one is severe depression, another one is Tourette's syndrome, and another one he's bipolar, plus he has 3 other ones. So as long as he's taking his medications, he's okay. He would appear perfectly normal to you if you were to meet him on the street and talk to him. You would never know that he needs these medications. Now, if he doesn't take the medications, then he becomes a different person. I'll give you an example. He's off his medications. My sister didn't know it. I put my arm around him, to pat him on the back, and then he goes home and tells my sister that my uncle tried to kill me. He tried to put his arm around my neck and strangle me. Of course, that was not the case, but his perception of my putting my arm around him and patting him on the back, that was his perception. Of course, my sister realized that it was not an accurate representation of what was being the case. But yeah, Christopher, by the time he was 16, he was on a number of medications for these problems. Now, the problem in Utah is it's either you're insane or you're not insane.
Right.
If you're not insane, then you're sane and there's no problem with you. If you're insane, that's what they mean by mental illness. So if you're insane, we'll put you in a straitjacket. So, Christopher, do you want us to put you in a straitjacket? I say, no. He says, your problem, Christopher, is that you're looking for an excuse to blame others for your failings. That was what he was told. And they just do not accept the diagnoses that come from the City of Hope doctors.
Right. And so now that we understand that he has, both suffering from some physical as well as mental disabilities, what happens ultimately, and I want to go back to, you talked earlier about is it Bergman?
Yeah, Candace Bergman is the lady whose daughter, Kyra, was in a lawsuit against a lady that Christopher drove to the court that very day. And Kyra would have won the case if Christopher had not driven this lady to the case. So that very same day at night, Christopher, who knows Candace because they pick up their drugs at the same county clinic. In other words, Candace Bergman also has a number of mental deficiencies. And also will mention that Christopher's wife also had the same 6 mental deficiencies that Christopher had. So the problem here for Christopher's entire life is he likes to associate with people who are mentally ill because he feels that they are the only ones who truly understand him. So I always attempted to get Christopher involved in other activities, but it never worked. His friends come from the people he meets at the clinic. When they're sitting and waiting to get their order of prescriptions picked up, he tries to make friends with these type of people. So Miss Bergman was one of these people.
And so just to be clear, when we talked about Miss Bergman, now, although are you saying that she had, and we talked about various convictions that she had, are these convictions or these were just charges?
Okay, she's been found guilty of 7 felonies, 6 in Duchesne County. My understanding is she never went to prison for any of the 6 felonies, and that she never served more than a total of 16 days total in jail for those 6 felonies.
Okay, all right. So anyway, so now what you have a situation where ultimately, because of this initial incident or initial problem that they had with the lawsuit or maybe their problems with Christopher, then we go to the point where all of a sudden he becomes someone that they target to get in trouble.
So Christopher got into an argument, and in the argument he says all types of things. One of the things he said after he found out that he was not going to get the money, because he was living out of his car at the time, even though I had paid the rent for his house for 2.5 months. He says, what do I have to do to get put in jail? Because he wanted to spend the night in jail. He didn't want to spend the night in his car again. So he says, do I have to rob a bank, break a window at a drugstore, or kill a judge? So there really was no intention on his part to harm anyone. He's just letting off steam. There's no threat to any judge that was ever made.
Okay. And so after that, he was reported and then taken into custody for.
That's exactly right. After he leaves, then I think that Candace or Candy Bergman is angry at him for him showing up in that morning and spoiling the case that they were going to win. And then she called the county sheriffs and she said, well, I want to report Christopher Uveas, he's out to kill a judge and commit suicide. And what the county sheriffs told her was, well, I'm sorry, are you a relative? Are you related to Mr. Uveas? And she says, no, I'm not. So they said, then there's nothing we can do. So she attempted 4 other phone calls. On the 5th phone call, what she told me was that she decided to say that she was Christopher's mother. Now, the problem here is that she is 3 years older than Christopher, so it's not possible for her to be the mother. Also, it's well known that her only son died in 1999 at 2 years old. Everyone in Duchesne County knows that she only has the 3 daughters left. That the little 2-year-old son, he died in the back of the car with the door locked. Now, one of her felonies is for child endangerment. So anyway, after about 5 or 6 months, her 3 daughters were returned to her, even though she was convicted of a felony of child endangerment. And the little 2-year-old was killed. And of course, she got off. There was no charges made against her whatsoever.
So ultimately, as far as Christopher is concerned, then he, after that, I was reading this interesting about the fact, it looks like in the transcripts, that representation was made in the transcript that was the mother.
Yes, in other words, in the transcripts, the county sheriffs, well, also, let me go back to the arrest warrant. The arrest warrant explicitly states that Kyra Bergman is his mother, and that Heather and Kyra Bergman are his sisters, and that he lived in their home.
Okay.
And that's also what the county prosecutor, Grant Charles, states. In the preliminary hearings, he puts the sheriff on the stand, and they just essentially go over the information that's in the arrest warrant, and they just repeat under oath that, yes, Kyra Bergman is his sister, Heather Bergman is his sister, that this is his mother, and that he lived in their house.
And there was never anything to do to confirm, as far as we know, obviously, if it's gone to the preliminary hearing, and it's under oath. Obviously, the officers did not do anything to investigate the truthfulness of what was being represented to the court.
I agree with that. The interesting thing is that I asked for Mr. Uveas, can you get me your license plate, your license? And he said, my license disappeared. On the license is the address at where he lives, and it is not the address of the Bergman house.
Right.
And of course, he also has his age on the license, and he's 3 years younger than Miss Bergman.
Okay. And so ultimately, what was the in the final analysis, what was the disposition of that case?
Okay. Well, the deputy, not the deputy, but the public defender recommended that he plead nolo contendere, which he did.
Okay. And so now you got a situation where you have an individual who is clearly suffering from both mental and physical disabilities, who makes an offhanded statement to another individual who, according to, at least based upon what you believe, it's your belief that she may also have the same issue mentally, and to the police, they come out, arrest him for trying to make a threat to a judge who there was never clearly no direct contact between Christopher and the judge himself.
That's correct.
It was to a third person.
Yeah.
They take Christopher into custody, charge him with that crime.
Yes.
Go to a preliminary hearing, convict him of it, where by the representations clearly that this person who was making the allegation was not even his mother, right?
Actually, she's not his mother,
and not even related.
Not even related.
So the reason why that's so important is that you have the only evidence that any of that could have ever happened came from this one individual.
Yes.
The problem with that individual making that representation is that if it's evidence, it's obviously not credible evidence, because clearly she made the statement under preliminarily stating that it was her son.
Well, Kyra and Heather, they were taken away from the mother, as I mentioned, about 5 years earlier, because she was convicted of child endangerment. So my own belief is that the three daughters will do whatever the mother tells them to say.
Yeah. So the testimony. So anyway, so we go forward, and they didn't testify. It was actually the deputy that testified. Correct?
It's the deputy who's doing the testifying, but the reports, both reports, clearly state that Kyra Borgman has filled out a separate report, which I was never able to find. That she states that, yes, Christian Uveas is my brother, and he has lived in our house.
Mm-hmm. And so now what you've got is you've got a problem with the fact that it all boils down to something that I know that we spoke earlier, and we've spoken in the past about Duchesne County and the fact that Duchesne County being a smaller county. I believe you said that how large?
In 2007, there was about 7,000 to 8,000 people living in Duchesne County.
Right. So now you've got a smaller county. You have these things that obviously, clearly, there's a problem when you have a preliminary hearing where you have officers that are testifying to statements that are being made by a material witness. Now, no matter what county that you're in, no matter where you are in the United States, I believe that any law enforcement officer, before he gets on the stand and testifies as to what a witness advised him of, should have took the time to determine, even before the arrest was made, as to the validity of it. Because anybody can call and say that anybody did anything.
I agree.
Yeah. So now you bring up one issue that, and I know, Dr. Brady, that this is a specific case that you've dealt with, but I can also represent that this is kind of like a microcosm of a bigger problem that we have in our country when it comes to the way that law enforcement officers investigate these cases. And basically in preliminary hearings, which are called probable cause hearings, the thresholds for the probable cause hearing is that it's typically, at least in the state of California and almost everywhere, and I'm assuming it's the same way in Utah, it has to be probable cause.
Yes.
So it's very little evidence to bind that person over, and now the person is facing charges. What the problem is that the officers are not doing their job.
I agree.
Even though there's only so much blame that you can have on Miss Bergman and her daughters, and I agree that obviously they did something terribly wrong. But I think the bigger problem is the fact that we have officers who basically have arrested an individual, turned the matter over to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor did not even take the time to even investigate to make a determination as to whether the information was true.
That's correct.
So now what you've done is you've basically, although the officer is testifying to what he's heard, it is basically he is bound over based upon something that is clearly a lie.
Yes.
Right? And regardless of whether and someone may not think that it's not important for someone saying that, hey, my son is going to kill a judge. The fact that the person lies about the relationship also goes to the heart of the truthfulness of the statement.
I agree.
You know, and I think that basically, again, we go back to another problem, and it's terrible. So now you have an individual who is told for whatever reason. We also have to talk about the issue of who was representing him, the duty to advocate, right? So the question should have been for the person. So he's been failed by so many people.
Yes,
he's been failed by, you know, the system from the beginning to the end. It begins with his friends. It goes to the police officers. It goes to the judge. It goes to, you know, whoever was involved in the process. The judge probably being the least culpable because because the other parties aren't doing their advocacy job. So
I agree.
He's only hearing what he's being told.
Right.
But the fact that you have a prosecutor who has a duty to make sure that whoever they're prosecuting, you have good, sound evidence. Then you have a public defender who's supposed to make sure that he is going to zealously advocate for his client. In other words, the first thing that you would have to be able to notice is, the first question I would ask my client is that your mother?
Now, Christopher repeatedly told the public defender that that lady is not my mother.
Right.
So the public defender knows for certain that the lady's testimony that is being repeated by the county prosecutor and the sheriff's deputy is false.
Right.
The public defender knows that for certain.
Right. So now you've gone to something that also happened. Now we're talking about the issue of bad representation, duty to advocate, which is always an issue because everybody wants to. Do you know that there is probably, and I wish I could do a study on how many people plead guilty at their arraignment, or at least the hearing right after the arraignment, meaning that the way that the system works is when you get arrested, right? You know, Bilal, that when you go to your first arraignment is where you get your discovery. The discovery is all your stuff. And the fact that what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to read the stuff. And typically when you read the stuff, you're supposed to send out an investigator to determine the accuracy of it and have a powwow, so to speak, with your client to make sure that whatever they're representing is correct, right? And so once you do that, then the DA is going to make offers with you. And before you take an offer, it is your responsibility to make sure that you do not let an innocent person get convicted of something that they did not do. But the problem is, in our system around the country, is that question is never asked. I very, very seldom ever have that conversation about the possibility of someone being innocent, right? The conversation is always about, well, that's a good deal. Well, it might be a good deal, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, so they're interested in due process. They're not interested in justice. They're interested in due process, and that's what they mean by justice. So
Right.
As long as you have a public defender and you sign documents and you make statements, then according to the present system, you have had your day in court.
Right. And so this is what's interesting about our system, and we got to do something about it, I'm telling you, is that the process is just as punitive as the punishment. Right? They make the system, they make the whole process in of itself punitive. And what I mean by that is that, look, if I tell someone this story, and and a judge hears it, or someone in the judicial system, or someone in our system, period, hears the story, you would think that someone would say, that's wrong. And it should be very easy for me to undo that problem.
I agree.
The problem is that they've got the process so tied up with more of a focus on the expediency of justice that it takes more time to unwind it than it does to put you into the problem. And that makes absolutely no sense. That it takes, now that we know that Christopher did not do this, and there's no question in my mind that Christopher did not do it, that now there's technical issues. You know, when you're talking about people with mental illness, you're talking about people who do not have the ability to possibly communicate with their advocates. They don't have, you know, they're kind of like, you know, they think it's okay that they're being treated this way. Sometimes when you have mental illness, people can convince you that you did things wrong when you didn't do them wrong. You see what I mean?
That's right.
Because
I
you're
agree.
thinking, look, if I came this far, then, you know, I'm not thinking right. Well, I must have did something. Well, no, you didn't really do anything. Is that basically nobody is giving you your due process. You're not being treated fairly, right? And so the problem is that there's so many people that are in jails or in prisons for things that they didn't do that they might have pled guilty to, that now even actual innocence makes it very difficult for those individuals to even get out of jail. So what it took you 30 minutes to plead guilty, and it might take people 30 years to get out of prison. You see what I mean?
Right, yeah.
And to me, I mean, that's mind-boggling. You know, because sometimes, you know, as a lawyer, you know how they always call us, you know, are you a liar? You know, they try to say, lawyer, you got to lie, you got to do whatever. But you know what the reality of it is that the way the system is made up, the people who suffer the most are the most honest people. The worst thing that you can do sometimes when you're dealing with the system is being honest. Because, and the first thing I'm going to tell someone, if, for example, if Christopher came to me today, the first thing I would have to tell Christopher, who I've spoken with Christopher, and Christopher is not, he doesn't exaggerate things. You know, he basically, I mean, I know he does have his issues, but for the most part, he's not trying to really manipulate you for the most part, right? So the first thing I would tell Christopher is don't talk to nobody. Don't say anything, right? You do everything you can because they're going to trick you. It's trick versus honesty. The person who has the ability to trick the system has a better chance of being found not guilty than an honest person. You know what I mean? Because I know that there's a situation where a person had basically went to the police. There was a girl that was missing. He goes to the police. He tells the police that he was the last person who seen this person coming home from a party. He ultimately was charged with assaulting this person and ultimately was convicted of it. And now, after all these years, he used to be, I can't remember what state it was in, but he actually worked for one of the Major League Baseball teams in you know, and basically out of all those years, finally 30 years later, well, it was close to 30 years, they found out that this guy was not guilty. And all he did, and had he not went to the police and said, "Hey man, I saw this girl at the party," he would have never been implicated. And he implicated himself, and by him being honest, he was accused of something that he didn't do. Whereas if he would have just shut up and didn't say anything, he would have never, you know, got himself into the problem. That's why we always tell people, do not, you know, Dr. Brady, we have an organization where we teach young people to deal with police encounters, and we always tell them that you have a right to remain silent and you should remain silent, you know.
Definitely. In other words, it's again, I think, a contrast between are you looking for justice or are you looking for due process?
Right.
If you just want to have a record of, you know, tape recordings and signatures and pleas, that's fine. But if you're really interested in justice, you need to really carefully look into the evidence before you start accusing someone of a crime.
Right.
I wanted to chime in on this. What you were saying in terms of like the mother I mean, even if the mother did take the stand, you know, was she credible within herself, you know? And then you got to look at the fact his disability. Was that factor even taken into consideration? You know, all of these things have to be taken into consideration. And it reminds me of my own personal case when you was talking about how Christopher, 1 minute, if he doesn't take his medicine, he exaggerate things, you know. And I have it reached personal with me because I have a brother that's like that. And, you know, he's bipolar. And one day I asked him, I said, why you don't take your medicine? He said, man, because he's locked up right now. And he said, it makes me like a zombie. Mm-hmm. I can't defend myself. If people push up on me, it's like I can't defend myself. So I don't take it because I want to be able to defend myself. Mm-hmm. And so when he got caught up with this case, and one of the liquor store owners said, well, he's just the nicest guy. I see him come in, and then he leave outside the liquor store, and he was really nice, and then he come back in, and he's just a totally different person. It's just totally different. And all the witnesses testified the same thing. But the fact that he was bipolar and hadn't taken his medication was not taken into consideration. And then like the attorney that represented him said, well, it's nothing I can do. He did it. It's nothing I can do. And that was it. And 35 minutes later, after the jury go out, come back here with 20 years. Right. But none of that was taken into consideration about his mental health. So, I mean, a lot of this has to do with people not taking the time out, and it's based on the numbers. Just lock them up, send them away, and, you know, worry about the paycheck at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah, the prosecutor wants to win. Mm-hmm. And if he has designs on higher office, he knows that he needs to have around a 99% win rate. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean, where due process starts to crowd out real concerns with justice.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the problem, of course, with Christopher's case, believe it or not, doesn't stop with that. He actually ended up being charged again, correct?
Oh, yeah, there's a second case. They said, well, because you threatened to kill this judge, you can no longer stay in Duchesne County. You have to move to Roosevelt County. And then in Roosevelt County, Christopher comes into contact with another lady who's, he met at a clinic, who is also having mental problems. And they had actually gone together for a couple months, but she's married, and then her husband found out about it. And then so my own personal view is that she set Christopher up. Christopher invited her up to his hotel room. She took off her clothes, went and had a shower, then put her clothes back on, came down and sat on Christopher's bed, and then Christopher sat next to her, thinking that this was an invitation to a sexual encounter, and all of a sudden everything turns around upside down, and she claims that Christopher attempted to assault her. In the police report, she twice states, Christopher held me down on the bed with his right arm and hand. Now, the interesting thing here is, unfortunately, back in 1994, Mr. Uvea slept on his arm for 24 hours, and the arm became paralyzed for about 18 to 20 months. The surgeon and a chiropractor were able to fix it, but in the interregnum of time that had passed, his arm shrank 70%, and his hand shrank to 1/2 its size. And then the surgeon made it very plain to Christopher. He says, you can never use any force to push or pull with this arm, because if you dislocate it, then I don't think we can fix it again. The implication being, if you dislocate this shoulder again, Christopher, we're going to have to amputate the arm. So I have extreme difficulty believing, Carol is her first name, Carol's insistence that Christopher held her down with his right arm and hand. I view that as being impossible. And in the police reports and in the 4 doctors who looked at Christopher, examining him, there is no mention of any palsied right arm or hand, either in the police reports, in the testimony during the 4 preliminary hearings, or in the 4 doctors' reports. There's absolutely no statement that would lead you to believe or understand that Christopher really doesn't have a right arm. So it's something like the old Kill a Mockingbird story, where the defendant is a black man, and the white lady's claiming that he held her down with his right arm, and he can't use his right arm. So everyone in the court knows that it's a fraud.
Right.
Nevertheless, the judge goes along with it and convicts him and sends him to prison, and then the story has a very bad ending because he attempts to escape from prison. He's shot in the back and killed in the movie and in the book. It's really bad.
Right.
So this is similar to Kill a Mockingbird, but luckily Christopher hasn't been shot in the back.
Right. Right.
Well, you know, when I hear this, we really got to look at history. Let's go back to '73. This is when Ronald Reagan basically closed down most of the neighborhood mental institutions that were basically serving these people right at the time the prison industrial complex was being created. The intent was to put these people back on the street and to be able to fill the privatized prison institution that was coming into fruition. Number one, let's look at processes. When we're talking about a justice system, the first thing, you got the inability of that justice system to be fair. It's a just us system that specifically has the grips for certain people who have the financial capability to navigate it. Number two, you've got, from a societal perspective, the inability to deal with the root causes of why this mental illness is so prevalent in society today. Mental illness stems from the inability to deal with stress that turns into distress, that turns into catastrophe. So if we're not dealing with the actual root causes, meds are not the root causes. The first thing they want to do is give these so-called mentally deficit people medicine to basically calm them down, but you don't deal with the actual cause of why the stress is. And if you don't get to the root cause, you will never solve the problem. Third, when you look at the person with the mental illness, when they don't have the options on board and they keep getting medicines to deal with the situation, what happens is they turn to an alternate means of action. And usually, and look at what you have seen in the last 10 years from a societal perspective. You've seen a conglomeration of mass shootings, of person-to-person destruction, of death by cop, etc. We as a society are not dealing with the mental deficit that is occurring in this country. Something is wrong with our ability to deal with those who are considered dysfunction. Lastly, when you look at mental illness is somebody's perception of abnormality based on the perception of what are supposedly societal laws. So the person who is necessarily or might be mentally imbalanced, that doesn't necessarily mean that person is off. What it is off by somebody's standards that have been set that dictate a pro-social dynamic. If that person has not been in that pro-social structure, and the only thing that their normality understands is that dysfunction, this becomes their normal. So we've got to go back and pull the layers and really get to what is going on from a societal perspective. And then lastly, as you talk about the justice system, if I throw a person in that system and that system is being reinforced, or the imbalance in that system is being reinforced by the legal structure, which is the law enforcement, etc., by all means, if I'm put in prison, or if I don't feel I've had a fair chance to operate in this system, I am going to look at that system as a liability, and I'm going to do everything I possibly can to go against that system, because that system was not fair to me. It did not bring just policies to the table, and then it put enforcers in to reinforce that unjust system. So everything that system has brought to me has been of a destructive nature. And you don't think I'm going to be destructive in return?
Right.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's a question of they don't want to pay.
Is that what's going on?
Society's decided that they want tax cuts. So they want to save the money. So by closing down all the mental health hospitals and clinics, Ronald Reagan is believing, in the short run at least, I'm saving some money. But it's what I call penny wise, pound foolish, because in the long run, they end up paying a heck of a lot more money. Because you start, instead of putting the people who have the mental health problems in institutions, they start ending up in prison. Much more expensive, 4 to 5 times more expensive. But people don't connect that this is a question of money. Same thing with the public defender. They do not want to pay the public defenders enough money so that a person who's a good lawyer will say, I'll be a public defender. I'll be a public defender. You pay me what I should be paid. But if you're going to say, well, we're going to pay you $30,000, $40,000 a year, then I'm not going to want to be a public defender. So I'll be able to get public defenders who don't have the real skills and qualifications that a public defender could have, and I think that would make a difference in the cases.
With the exception of the public defenders work for the prosecutors.
Honestly, it's truly exasperating to see that, you know, we have cases as such happening nowadays still. And I feel like we do not deal with the root causes so much so that it's been normalized, you know. We have, even though we hold 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisons are also ours, you know, and that's something that should be really taken into consideration. And I guess I have a question for you, Mr. Brady. You know, I was reading here that according to the Bureau of Justice, they found that 32% of federal prisoners and 40% of jail inmates report to have at least one disability. And I wanted to ask, you know, according to you, what do you think are the communities that are most affected by these issues and these court cases?
Okay, well, mental disabilities can affect anyone. With respect to Christopher, I really didn't want to believe he had a mental disability until the proof is, at age 16, my sister says, Mike, here's the proof. City of Hope diagnosed him as having these disabilities. So that changed my view. I became more concerned about Christopher, especially about decisions he had made about leaving California, which I said, Christopher, this is a horrible mistake. I do not want you going back to Utah. He said, no, the ladies promised me that she'll give me a house, buy me a house. Well, that turned out to be a lie. So to make a long story short, I think people think that when they did away with all the mental health hospitals and clinics, and you know, they get a tax cut, they think there's oh wow, we're saving money, but then these people become homeless, they become criminalized, oh, you're guilty of stealing or whatever, and then they end up in prison or jail. And I understand it's 4 or 5 times more expensive to pay for an individual being institutionalized in a prison as it is for a person who can be maintained at a mental health facility or at an outhouse or a convalescent, where you can regulate the person, who they do, what they see, who they talk to. So yeah, I think people think they're saving money, but as I said before, it's penny wise, pound foolish.
They say it takes $103,000 to house an individual for a year. In a mental institute is something like $24,000 for that same time period.
That's crazy.
So yeah, I would say that people underestimate mental illness in our society. They do not want to believe that the person who's been arrested for robbing them is mentally ill. They want to believe that, no, this is a vicious criminal and he needs to be put in prison. They don't want to hear that, oh, you know, he has a problem with bipolar or he's got Tourette's syndrome. Tourette's syndrome means, that happened a couple times, because all of a sudden he'll just come up to you and start yelling at you, expletive deleted. And already, when he did that to me, I already knew he had Tourette's syndrome, so it didn't bother me at all. However, someone on the street who's meeting Christopher, and here's Christopher going off like this, would say, well, this is assault. He's going to beat me up. I'm going to call the police and have him arrested for assault. So it's a misunderstanding about the nature of mental illness and that it can impact anyone.
Yeah. I had another question also. Would you say that people underestimate mental illness when it comes to certain people of color? Because we've seen, you know, in this, especially in school shootings, where we see kids that are Hispanic or people of color, you know, they come out on the radio and they say they're terrorists, they're whatever. But when a person that is white, they are automatically coined as mentally ill.
Yeah, well, I think the vast majority of these killings are carried out by white students. I want to make that very clear. Not by Latino, Hispanic, African American, Asian American students. It's 95% are white students. So, but again, people must have been aware of these mental problems they had because the evidence is there on the internet. And then after the fact, then the kids will come forward, oh yeah, he talked to me about he was going to kill everyone. But the persons don't do anything about it. They don't go to the authorities, the nurse, the doctor, the gym coach, and say, you know, I was talking to Mike, and Mike said he'd love to kill a whole bunch of people. They just say, okay, he's just ranting and raving. So they don't report it. And of course, then he actually gets the opportunity. Maybe his father and mother have guns in the house. They're at work. He leaves school early. He can get access to those guns, go back to school, and do what he claimed he was going to do.
But isn't that Rosa's point? The perception. It's the perception of the
I
people
agree.
in marginalized communities. There are these vicious demons that are going to do all this destruction. But on the flip side, the white or the kid with the better safety net is perceived as, oh, just somebody who is slightly imbalanced, etc. And until that perception is changed, until the societal perception of how it looks at not only people with mental illness, but people across the whole spectrum, and does some type of equality level, we're going to keep seeing this. And that's just not fair from a societal perspective in terms of the people that are in these situations, these marginalized communities, and more importantly, these people with these mental illness, because most of the people with true mental illness, they come from the marginalization of not being able to function in society.
Yeah.
I agree. And people, like in my neighborhood, Bellflower, they are afraid of mentally ill people. So if they see someone talking to themselves walking down the street, they will cross over to the street. They will not attempt to engage the person, find out, do you have a place to sleep tonight? Do you need a couple of dollars for a hamburger? No, they will try and isolate that person from them. They are fearful of a person who they see talking to themselves.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I talk to myself all the time.
But, what's really crazy? Me too, Doc. So. But the thing what's amazing about the issue with mental illness, and it kind of shows our structure and kind of the paradigm that we have when we're dealing with problems in our society and dealing with the criminal justice system, is that we have to figure out what we're doing is not working, and we don't understand that we're basically, we're headed for self-destruction if we don't begin to start figuring out ways to deal with, for example, somebody. And I'm the same person. I'm like you, Dr. Brady. I mean, I used to have this whole, I guess in a denial stage when it came to mental disabilities. I guess it's because of my age or kind of, how I was socialized. That was kind of like something that I felt like, sometimes it's something that we don't really understand. But now I believe that understanding that the fact that we spend more money on prosecuting people and on our penal system, and we don't spend more money on identifying people at a younger age who may have some sort of mental disorder and mental disease. It's kind of like, if you really want to begin to start dealing with our criminal justice system and kind of minimizing the amount of individuals who are subjecting themselves to the criminal justice system, we need to identify these people and give them the right type of treatment. I mean, we care so little about our mentally ill. Even when it comes to the way we treat our veterans, people don't even know how many people got PTSD.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we're always shouting, thank you for your service, and all this stuff. And then I have clients who been to Iraq and been to Afghanistan and have came back, and they are suffering from something. They get wrapped up in the criminal justice system. They put them in jail. They go through that whole process, and nothing happens. You know what I mean? So we're not even taking care of our own veterans. How many people do you see that are out there, in some of these, that are homeless?
Yeah.
You would be shocked how many homeless veterans that we have, and how many people come through that we're talking about all the way back to Vietnam. I knew guys that are homeless from Vietnam, suffering from PTSD, that's been on the street, for years, and we're not dealing with them. And if we don't do that, I'm telling you, and I said this before two shows ago, if we don't start doing it, and I always use this statement that the chickens are going to come home to roost, we're going to start seeing a whole lot of self-destruction if we don't change the way that we're dealing with these types of these things that are going on. I mean, what happened to Christopher, from the very beginning, if they understood that something was going on, we don't, the first thing that they should have done, if they knew something was wrong with Christopher, and they should have contacted his family. You know what I mean? And they know something. They don't even talk to these people's families. They don't try to take the time to figure out what's going on. I mean, it's like this individual's, the humanity. I mean, whatever happened to the humanity? Whatever happened about about this individual? It's almost like we're not even, these individuals aren't even people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't care that this individual is, you're all you've done is you've taken someone and you've, thrown them away and you've made them worse. Instead of just saying, we think that there's something might be wrong with him. Let's see if we can help him. But you don't even take the time to make sure that something is not wrong with this individual, and none of this stuff would have ever happened. You know what I mean? Because there should be mechanisms in place. I should feel comfortable enough to know that if something happens to me or something happens to my family, Lord forbid they lose it,
It's a safety net.
that somebody's out there that's going to say, hey, let's first of all, let's send them out for some sort of mental evaluation, and figure out really what's going on with these individuals.
Yeah.
But they're not doing it, and I'm telling you, we have to deal with that.
Well, I want to salute the doctor, because one of the things that is so imperative is documentation, and the fact that you went above and above and wrote the book to try to get information out there while you engage. I think we need much, much more of that, because as Brother Ali said, we have got to start creating templates or mechanisms, and if we don't have a story to tell, then we're not going to have the ability to bring any type of blueprints to the table. So salute that, and salute you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, and weeks ago we talked about the school shootings and the mental health problems with the individuals who actually, go off and just do these school shootings. And recently over in Tennessee, the guy who actually did the Waffle House case, they just diagnosed him and said that he was mentally ill and he's not going to stand trial. But it reminds me of, a study that just came out this past week. They said our schools has now reached a point where we have more police on school campus than we have counselors. And that's where it starts at right there. When you have all these kids that's going through all these different, depressions, and whether they being bullied, so forth and so on, it's initiated there. And if it's ignored there, then once they get out of school, then it's going to continue to flourish. It's 2.2 million people that's mentally ill that go untreated. And that's a big number,
Yeah, and going back to the whole police and counselor ratio, I feel like the reason why we have less counselors and more police is because we allocate 5% of our budget to education and 55% of it to our defense system.
Yeah.
So I think you hit it dead right. We don't spend anywhere near what you spend on education. People view education as something to cut, not to improve on. So that's a severe problem. If you want to continue to cut the education budgets because you think you're saving money, again, it's the penny wise, pound foolish idea that people who graduate from the high schools are going to have severe problems going to college. You're going to have to spend a whole bunch of more money in remedial education in the college, slow down their graduation rates, and then you have Governor Brown complaining that the students are taking too long to graduate. How come they're taking 6-7 years to graduate? Well, spend more money at the high school and grammar school level, maybe that'll improve.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. And also, just really quick about the issue with you said the PDs and the prosecutor. I mean, the public defenders are paying them, more money. I mean, it has come to a situation where, getting your rights oftentimes come down to paying.
It's money, yeah.
Yes, it's all about money and getting someone that's going to go in there that's going to protect your rights, because it's not, it's caught in order to, the way that the system is made up, it's very, very difficult to advocate on behalf of individuals. That's a very, very difficult thing to do, because you're going to have to rock, the system, because the system is made up like this. They don't really want to try cases. They want to figure out plea bargains, and they want to know why are you taking so many cases to trial, and then it's really, really difficult in order to advocate on top of for these individuals. They're going in, they're pleading guilty to things that they shouldn't be pleading guilty to, and our whole system of how they deal with people and finding people able to stand trial when they shouldn't. I mean, some of these individuals, the standard of finding people mentally competent is terrible as well. They need to change that, Ben, we ran out of time. We're playing the song over? Okay. So anyway, I want to thank again, Dr. Brady for coming in. His book, A Critical Analysis of the Public Defender's Office in Duchesne County, Utah, based on the 2007-2008 case studies of Mr. Christopher Uvelis. It's available on Amazon.com. Please go on and read the book. It's some good reading. It covers a lot of areas. And again, I appreciate you coming in, Dr. Brady. And hopefully I can get you back in again because we need more than 1 hour to talk about this.
I'd be glad to come back.
All right, thanks a lot. So
thank you.
I'll see you guys next week, same time, same place, same channel.
Your NBC Sports Radio update starts now.
Well, that was quick. I'm Tim Murray. Dak Prescott connected with Tavon Austin for a 66-yard score on just the third play from scrimmage. Cowboys lead the Giants 10-0 after one quarter on Sunday Night Football on NBC. Earlier today in a rematch of the AFC Championship game, the Jags topped the Patriots 31-20. Blake Bortles threw for 377 yards and 4 scores, but he says this was just one game.
I think everybody kind of hyped the game up a little bit more than we felt the importance of it was inside, or I guess made more of it than I think it actually was. It was our home opener, week 2, and to us, besides that, it wasn't really anything else. We expected to come out and play good and win the football game.
In Green Bay, after Packers kicker Mason Crosby missed a 52-yard field goal in the closing seconds of regulation, the Vikings looked to take the lead on their first possession of overtime.
Snap spot. Right-footed Carlson kick is up, and it is no good. Missed again.
Missed field goal outside the 20-yard line. Wow. It's brought back to the spot of the